Welcome to Breakout session number 2. Having a good time learning stuff today? Feeling encouraged? Yeah, good. Well, we're going to talk about something hard, human trafficking. We're going to learn things about the state of human trafficking here in Central Florida and just how prevalent it is, which will surprise many of us, or most of you. We're also going to have some stories of kind of how a new church is plugging in and how a church that's been in this journey for years and years and years, what that might look like for a church 5-10 years from now. And it's going to be a neat way of talking about human trafficking. I guess I should introduce myself first. I'm Greg Snyder. I am a co-founder of an organization called Safe Central Florida. Safe Central Florida is one of those with organizations that we heard about this morning and heard about throughout today. We're not a nonprofit. We are an alliance of nonprofits, law enforcement, churches, businesses, and individuals that are all coming together to fight human trafficking in Central Florida. So it's kind of a different model, and we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like, but mostly we want to hear about human trafficking here and what we as a faith-based community can do about it, and as individuals what we can do about it. So just tiny bit about SAFE. First of all, a truth here is I am not an expert on human trafficking. I was at a conference with two of my friends up here, at a conference put together by National Christian Foundation, and we heard a great presentation by a very dynamic woman named Heather, talked about SAFE in Washington, which is the model of which SAFE in Central Florida is patterned after. And she talked about the problem of human trafficking in the state of Washington and how it wasn't a problem over there. It was a problem right there in Seattle and Washington. And what they did about it. And she came out of the philanthropy, the Gates Foundation, so she had some skills. But the three of us were at this conference down by Disney, and we heard about this, and we said, well, heard about how prevalent the problem is here in Central Florida, and Dee may go into that a little bit. And we said, somebody has to do something about that here in Central Florida. And we all looked around, and there wasn't anybody else listening to us. And I guess that meant that we were supposed to do something about it. And we realized, well, we're not equipped to do this. I mean, we don't have skills in this area. We're not networked in this area. Karen and I came out of Siemens. We had just retired, so we have great skills in energy policy and wind turbines and gas turbines and renewable energy. And Daryl's our IT guy, worked in Orlando Health. So we don't know anything about human trafficking, but God said, you do it, and I'll be with you. And it is an amazing story. Here, a little over a year later, we actually brought somebody, Diane, here that knows something about it. So we're not totally in the blind here. But in here, a year later, we have 60 alliance members, or over 60. We have put together a great advisory council that helped us understand what the gaps were, what areas in the fight against human trafficking were not being addressed. And our mission is not to be a group that funds operational budgets, but a group that helps a project get started, helps a project get finished, or one of our favorites is a proof of concept. And our projects might look like helping an organization put together an independent living facility. Maybe some funding for that, or another project we're working on is a directory of services for Central Florida that can help groups with vetted providers that can help survivors. Another project is fun. It's bringing 3 nonprofits together that have always dreamed about working together, but their traditional funding people will say, well, I need a proof of concept. You need to show me you can do this. So that's where SAFE comes in. We're partnering with those 3 nonprofits, never worked together before, but that's to provide kind of holistic care for survivors. Another one to help in terms of employment, a big challenge for survivors. So we've done 5. We're doing 5 projects now, and it's neat. And unlike the community out in Washington, where the support for the alliance was predominantly business-based, we felt it was the call of the church to support the nonprofits in this space. And so we decided we're going to ask the churches to step up. And wow, it's fun to watch the church begin to mobilize. And over half of our funding is coming directly from churches. And out in West, I think it's maybe zero or very small. So that's kind of the neat, that's the kind of a beginning success of pulling churches together, pulling business together, pulling nonprofits together. And you heard one or two success stories about that. So our objective today is to learn about the current state of human trafficking in our community, hear from a pair of churches, one that's just new into the space, or kind of new into the space, and one that's been in there a long time, and then discuss how we might apply best practices for our individual churches or groups. So that's the goal here. And we're going to kick it off on the experienced side to have Dee Coleman come up. Why don't you come on up here, Dee? And Dee is a well-known face and advocate for human trafficking survivors. She's the executive director for Samaritan Village, has been in this role for, 12 years, something like that? Wow. And she's been an advocate and been passionate about this for over 20 years. And she's in various task force, advisory councils, including Safe Central Florida. So she is a passionate, knowledgeable advocate that will kind of bring you up to speed on the human trafficking challenge here in Central Florida. So welcome, Dee Coleman.
Greg. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, I probably veered off the prompt a little bit because I figured that I am in a room, or at least it feels like I'm in a room of peers and faith leaders and nonprofit leaders. And so just really quickly to kind of reintroduce myself, my name is Dion. You can call me Dee. I've been the executive director for Samaritan Village for the last 6 years, almost 6 years. And if you don't know, Samaritan Village is a local agency here that provides a safe place for women that have been sex trafficked to heal from trauma, recover from addiction, and take back their lives so that they can become catalysts for change in their communities. And we provide, right now we currently have 2 safe houses where these women come, and we provide them with full therapeutic care, spiritual formation, vocational training, and all the things that they need to reset and restart their lives. So today at Serve the City, I think this is the 3rd Serve the City that I've been a part of, and I'm super grateful to be here. Thanks, Safe, for allowing me this platform, because I think this was yours to begin with, and to Mosaic. But I know that when you come to a Serve the City conference, you really are coming because you want to be a change agent, or you are a change agent, or you want to see transformation happen in our community. And so I feel like today we're going to talk about being transformed people and what it means for us as leaders, kind of bringing the kingdom of God on earth and providing a glimpse in our community of what that reconciliation looks like, right? What it exists, how it exists in eternity. But before we get there, I just kind of want us to get on the same page, because like I said, this feels like a room of peers. How many of you are nonprofit workers, like you work in a nonprofit? How many of you are church, which is also sometimes a nonprofit, but like how many are you specifically a church person? It's not a way to say it. How many of you work like in a social services nonprofit, so to speak? Okay. How many of you, by a show of hands, feel very confidently you know what human trafficking is? Okay, so about 50% of the room. I figured most of you guys know, most of us have at least heard about what human trafficking is or have an idea. But simply put, human trafficking is the buying and selling of a person for another person's gain. And there are really 2 main forms when you hear of human trafficking that exist. The first is labor trafficking, and the second is sex trafficking. And at Samaritan Village, we focus primarily on sex trafficking victims because nationally here in the United States, about 79% of those cases are sex trafficking cases. And so for those of you that didn't raise your hand about human trafficking, when you heard me say, or when you heard Greg kind of introduce this as, or maybe you saw it on the brochure or the program, that this was going to be a session about human trafficking, I'm sure there were lots of thoughts that popped into your head about what the victims of trafficking look like, right? Were these kids that were snatched off the street and thrown into that unmarked white van? Did you get images in your brain of brothels and red light districts, or maybe perhaps of migrant farm workers slaving away in fields, right? Well, whatever kind of image that popped into your head, whether it was kind of labor trafficking or sex trafficking, one of the things that I know that before I even started doing this work, I had this misconception that it was something that happens far away from here, something that happens far away from Orlando, Florida, something that even happens far away from my own path in life. I don't ever come across somebody that's been trafficked. I mean, now I do, obviously, based on the work, but prior to this, I didn't. And we can take for granted that something so atrocious, right, could exist in the same city, in the same region as the happiest place on earth, in a nice suburban town like Winter Garden. But in fact, if you've heard anything about human trafficking, if you probably know nothing, you've at least heard this statistic, which is that Florida ranks as the third highest state for reported cases of trafficking in the United States, right behind California and Texas. And so where in the world are people being trafficked in Winter Garden, in Orlando? What do they look like? When you think of those initial images that I talked about, you can kind of see maybe how it happens in Southeast Asia. We have a volunteer who used to work on a cruise ship for a number of years, and when the cruise ship would dock in certain countries, they'd get off this cruise ship, and along the shores were women and children lined up, readily available to be bought by the people, sometimes Navy men, by people that were getting off of these cruise ships. It's very clear. But we live in America, land of the free, home of the brave. You don't go to Cocoa Beach and see women and children lined up on the dock there waiting to be sold. So what do they look like? How did they become victims? These are all questions that we have when we hear about human trafficking happening in our city. And I could stand up, sit here and talk to you about the statistics and the facts behind human trafficking, and I could educate you with all of this. I could tell you how you could partner with Samaritan Village and SAFE to rescue these victims off the streets, and how we could lock up all the traffickers and give all these poor women, a pat on the head and the things that they need to restart their lives so that we can transform our city for good. But instead, I'm actually going to challenge you guys today. And so this is where I'm veering a little off track that, Greg is probably going to be like, Dion's not invited back to serve the city.
Let it go.
So instead, I'm going to ask you to throw out any thought, idea, or stereotype that you might have of a victim, what a human trafficking victim here in America looks like, or how that person might have gotten caught in the situation. And I want to share a quick story with you all. We're all here kind of in the faith space, and it's a story of a woman that's had an encounter that transforms her entire community. And it's probably a story that if you've been in church at any point in your life, you've heard before. It's about a woman who has historically one of the longest recorded conversations in the Bible with Jesus. It's about the Samaritan woman. And in John 4, the story starts, I'm going to give a very DS version of this. This is, not theologically sound, but it's my summary of the story in John 4 where Jesus has been teaching, and him and his disciples, they are traveling back from Galilee, and he finds himself in the town of Samaria, and the disciples are hungry, and so they go off to get some food, and Jesus plops down at this well. It's Jacob's well. And along comes a woman. Now, the Bible does not tell us her name, her age, where she comes from, except for the fact that she's a Samaritan woman. And Jesus sees her, and he says to her, "Give me a drink." This lady is minding her own business, and the stranger interrupts her and asks her for water. And, I think her first instinct was kind of to size Jesus up and ask him, why are you asking me for water? Because first of all, she's a woman, and this is a man. And second of all, she's a Samaritan woman. And Samaritan and Jews really didn't have much dealings with one another. And so Jesus gives this odd answer in reply back. He says, well, if you knew the gift of God and who it was that was saying to you, "Give me a drink," you would have asked him for water, and he would have given you living water. And if anybody randomly came up to you in Target and said something like that, you would be like, I'm never coming back to this Target again. I'm pretty sure at that moment she was processing a new well to get water from in the future. But they began having this dialogue, and she's being inconvenient, so she challenges him back and says, well, fine, where do you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? And after some back and forth, Jesus offers her, back and forth of Jesus offering her this living water, she gives in and she says, sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty and have to come here to draw water. She's like, fine, here's like the $2 to keep going. And I think Jesus sees this, and I honestly think Jesus has a sense of humor, but he sees her attitude and he says, okay, great, now go and get your husband. And she goes, well, I have no husband. And he goes, you're right in saying that, for you've had 5 husbands, and the man you're with now is not your husband. And I think she probably spilled her water. And she probably began to look at this man probably for the first time, really to see who was standing in front of her. And she might have even spilled her water, mouth open. She's shocked because Jesus has just called this lady out in all of her business. Now, like I said, in my lifetime, and if you've been in church any amount of time, you've probably heard, I say I've probably heard this story at least 20 times in church. And every time I've heard this story, I've always sat back with a little bit of judgment, because how many times would you have to get married and remarried and married and remarried and married and remarried before everybody in your town kind of sits back and goes, what is wrong with her? Why can't she keep a man? Why can't she keep her marriage intact? Could you hear the rumblings, right? We go, wow, she's had 5 husbands, and the man she's with now is not even her husband. And from an outsider's perspective, we think, what is wrong with this woman that she can't keep this marriage intact? She's trying to get the validation and the love and care from these men, and she's clearly looking in all the wrong places. And so we read the story, and we look at her, and we go, no wonder she had to have an encounter with Jesus, because clearly her life needed to be transformed, right? Maybe I'm the only one that thinks like this. That's probably the only one that read the Bible like this. This is why I go to church. When she encountered Jesus at the well, Jesus didn't judge her. He didn't ask her what was wrong with her. He didn't heap pity on her. He looked at her and he saw the full context of her story. And he saw what was really happening in her life. We look at her story from the outside and we look at it a certain way. But if we look at it from the lens of Christ and how he saw that, he really saw her in the moment of time that she lived there. So if we just go back a little bit, this moment in time, women were deemed to be at the same status of the undesirables of society. Men held the power. Men chose their wives. Men determined how and when they got divorced, and men determined if she was worthy enough to be remarried. The security for a woman at that time period was at the mercy of those around her. So when we look at it from that perspective, this woman was not someone that was just neglecting her duties as a wife or as a woman, being frivolous and bouncing from man to man. She was actually a victim. She was a victim of being passed around, used, and unwanted. She was a victim of a system that didn't protect her. She was a victim of people not loving her, not seeing her, not valuing her. And so when she comes to this well and she sees Jesus and Jesus looks at her and says, I'm thirsty, give me a drink, he isn't asking. It's a rhetorical question. He's looking at her and he sees her soul crying out, I am thirsty. I'm thirsty for someone to love me. I'm thirsty for someone to see me. I'm thirsty for someone to claim me. And Jesus says, give me a drink because I will give you living water, the water that you need, so that I can fill you up until you are overflowing. And that's what he's really saying to her. And then, of course, he reveals himself to her, and she's taken aback. And he completely has read her story, and she sees this as, Jesus sees her as somebody who's been wounded and neglected, and he sees that she has been left vulnerable and thirsty. That's the story of the Samaritan woman. I shared that with you because there are Samaritan women right here in our community in Central Florida, right here in Orlando, in our very own backyard. And I say women, children, and men. We're all Samaritan women that are being caught in a system of oppression, invisible to all of us that live in the comforts of our nice suburban neighborhoods, and they are waiting to be seen. There are a lot of parallels that I can draw between this woman and her life and the women that have been a part of Samaritan Village. They too have been passed around, used and abused by men and sometimes women traffickers and Johns, and society sees them as not my problem. I don't see them. So when I first got up here, I asked how many of you knew what the definition of human trafficking was, and I gave a general definition and a couple statistics that I threw out there, and I told you to throw out any thought, idea, or stereotype that you might have had about a victim or how they arrived at this place in their lives. And the reason I asked you to do that is because the answer of how someone gets trafficked lies in the story of the Samaritan woman at the well. Power, oppression, discrimination, abuse, neglect. We have all at some point in our lives experienced one or more of these things, and they leave us empty. They leave us vulnerable. They leave us thirsty. And guess what? When we're thirsty, we're vulnerable, and the enemy preys on the thirsty, right? And he will take hold and create a mirage so that we can take hold of whatever it is that we think might quench that thirst, right? We'll cling to whoever and whatever makes us feel seen until we have an encounter with Jesus and until Jesus sees us, the whole us, and sets us free of ourselves, of our addictions, of our insecurities, of our pain, or whatever made us vulnerable to begin with. So what does that look like here in Central Florida? I kind of gave you an idea of what human trafficking is, and I think you guys are a very smart room. You've heard about it. You could see it on TV. You can hear about it in news stories. The issue of human trafficking is multifaceted, multilateral, and extends beyond the work that SAFE is doing, Samaritan Village, or any other agency that's doing this kind of work. We as a community have to get to the root of the issue. And in order to do that, we have to be honest as faith leaders, as people in positions of influence, to be honest about what's causing it. And it's not just about what the media tries to display. It's not just that people have made bad choices and have landed in this decision. It's not just that people are snatched off the street. It is part of our responsibility as leaders to know that this is happening and for us to use our areas of expertise to combat it. So whether we're talking about human trafficking, or we're talking about poverty, or race relations, or refugees, or serving the least of these, we have to recognize that we cannot transform our community without first being transformed ourselves. When we can be transparent with ourselves and others, when we restore dignity to the people we are serving, offering freedom and not a fix, and we walk in Christ's authority to dismantle systems of oppression, power, discrimination, abuse, then we get the joy and the honor and the privilege of experiencing the fullness of the gospel. So that's my challenge to you all today.
And let me introduce two people that are in the church. I'll ask Meg to come up first. Meg has a dual role. You're in the church from being from Northland, but also a passionate leader of One-to-One Hope, which is a ministry. So come have a seat over here. And Meg has a background in political science, criminal justice. She has been a probation officer, a representative, a certified victim advocate, gosh, all sorts of stuff. So needless to say, she knows stuff and is qualified and has been deeply rooted in this space for a number of years. And I also like Patina, come up here, Patina Ripley. Ripley is a Ripkey. I don't want to say Ripley. It sounds kind of like a believe it or not thing. Exactly, Ripkey. I've known Patina all of a year and a half or two now. Yeah. And she's associate pastor at a nearby church in my community, First United Methodist of Oviedo. And she is a passionate lover of people. She just wants to plug her church and her personal time into serving people in and around her, besides being a worship leader, musician, songwriter, all sorts of little things. So I'm going to start, talk about how, maybe she can tell a little bit of story of how her church got involved in the fight against human trafficking and how maybe a couple ways it plugged in, and then let her hand over the microphone to Meg, who can talk about what this might look like 5 to 10 years from now.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to share this story. I kind of need to start about 10 years ago because I didn't really know a lot about human trafficking. You see a little bit on the news, you hear a little bit. And so I was in Tampa, serving in a church in Tampa, and I remember it was a Monday, and somebody came into the church office and said, and this is what she said, did you know that we had prostitutes in worship on Sunday. And I said, what? No. And I did have that image in my mind of what I thought, somebody would look like. And I know wording has changed. But back then I was like, okay. But for me, I'm like, I need to understand like what's happening. That's amazing. That was my first thought. I was like, that's fantastic. So I talked to the woman and I said, what's going on? She said, well, they came in, and she told me who they came in with, and I didn't even realize it. So I said, I need to know who this person is and what's going on. So I found out that there was a woman from our congregation. It wasn't a big church, and she was volunteering at an organization called Created Women. And maybe you've heard of that organization. And so I thought I just felt inspired. So I went and I said, I need to go down and see what's happening. So I did. I went down, I made an appointment, and I sat with this woman. She was from the islands, I'm not sure exactly where, and she said she was living in this house with many women who were coming out of, they were incarcerated, and they were coming out, drug charges, prostitution, different things. And it was kind of like a halfway house type thing, and she was living there. And she said, well, I'm going to be leaving soon, and I'm looking for someone that can take my place. I said, well, I'm married and have children. I can't live here, but what can I do? I don't know. Let's talk about it. So I ended up saying that I would lead a Bible study. And I remember the first Bible study that I was going down to, and I felt overwhelmed. I was really anxious, and I'm driving down to Ybor City, if you're familiar with Tampa at all. Driving to Ybor City, and I'm pulling in, I'm saying, God, what am I doing? I have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I am so out of my comfort zone. I have nothing in common with anybody here. What am I going to do? And I'll never forget that God said, because I said, I have nothing to offer. And I heard the Spirit say, you have everything to offer. You have Jesus to offer them. You have the water, they're thirsty. And I just went in, and at that time, the first time, the woman who was living there, it was her last time leading the Bible study, and then it was me. And so I'm just listening to all of them, and they're going around, they're talking, and she said, Patina, do you have anything that you would like to add? And I don't know how or why or what, and I just said, I just want all of you to know that Jesus knocks on the door, and he never forces entry, but he knocks, and you have to open. That's all I said. 5 minutes later, there was a young woman sitting around, and she just stopped. She said, please, and I looked at her, she's sobbing. And she said, I've never heard anybody describe Jesus like that. And she said, I always thought that he was trying to force his way into my life and control my life. And I never knew that because I had said Jesus was a gentleman. And she said, I never knew that. So fast forward, her name, by the way, is Ashley. And Ashley just became this incredible woman of God. And she still works in that ministry over there. She's married now. She has a baby. And she was coming out of prostitution herself. So I come over here and hadn't really heard human trafficking. I mean, I'd heard it, but like, how does that fit? What's sex trafficking? What? So I'm praying about it. And at this church, I was over all of missions. And so I literally had prayed and said, Lord, I just feel like you're calling the church to human trafficking. I'd seen it, I'd heard about it a little bit. Well, this guy who was on my missions guide team came up to me, or actually sent me an email. His name is Jim. And he said, hey, don't know if you're interested in this at all, but there's this guy, my neighbor, and he started this organization, Safe Central Florida, and it has to do with human trafficking. And would you be interested? And I'm like, God's funny. And so I was like, okay. And I think that's kind of my lesson is like, just be open to whatever God is saying, even if you feel like you're completely out of your comfort zone. You were talking about that too. So I said, okay, and I invited Greg. And it was during COVID. Like, everything is shut down. And here we are with our masks on, and you came in, you're like 4 of us sitting there talking. What does this mean? What does this look like? And it has really flourished. I mean, in a time when you think that nothing can flourish, there's been, in the desert, all this growth at our church and people wanting to serve. And I know that we've had many people who participated in Samaritan Village, and when they're trying to get furniture for a safe house, and women just want to help, doing, and men, we Harbor Hope International through SAFE. The connection, we've had several people who've been trained to be mentors, one-on-one mentors. There's always something to do. Oh, and so my whole role in this has just been, because it's kind of taken on a life of its own. It's really out of control now. And people are asking me, well, what does Samaritan Village need? I'm like, I don't know. Let me go find out. It happens all the time to me. So it's really good. Our church has really taken hold of it, and that's been 2 years ago at the most. It's like you said, like a year and a half ago. We've done all kinds of stuff. We have a mission summit, and we invite our mission partners in, and we have 3 core missions, 4 now, and human trafficking is one of the initiatives that we have. We invite and we celebrate, and you guys have been there. It's been awesome. I will say this in closing, that I heard this illustration. Actually, it wasn't an illustration. Somebody told me this. They were a farmer, and they said, if you're a cattle farmer, that cows need salt, and cows will do everything they can to find salt. If you don't have a salt lick, they will lick the barn. They will lick the ground. They will lick you. They will be desperately looking for salt, and we have salt, and we have the answer, and we may not know in what form we need to offer it, but just say yes, and that's what we've done.
Thank you. So Northland's been in the community for 50 years, and we've done both local and global. And so, we started out like most churches, homelessness, disaster response, single moms, things like that. And in 2015, we did a call to action with our congregation. About 300 of our congregants showed up. Obviously, that's narrowed down quite a lot, which I'm very happy about. But what we decided was that the church is in a very unique position to help those who are brokenhearted, because all of us are brokenhearted. And we also recognize that within the church, we're an army. We're an army of people with different set of skills who can provide the bridge to that healing. And that's what we do. I would caution anyone who wants to start a ministry at a church, think large, but also realize that's not going to be the reality. Go ahead and dream. It's important to do that. And then let God, through your prayers, guide you as to what that is. So right now we have 4 pillars that we've narrowed down and we feel very solid about. We have a speakers bureau. So Dee and I have done presentations, things like this right here. We have victim advocates. We're actually certified with the state of Florida. And when we decided to do victim advocacy, we wanted to make sure we were doing it the right way, which meant we don't have a bed, we don't have a house, we're never going to have a house. That's not what God put on our heart. So we went to our local safe house in Seminole County and said, you've got 64 beds. Can we have 2? And they're like, sure. So we have a contract with them. So when law enforcement does rescue, we have the emergency beds. We're just an option. We're not the ones. We're just an option for them. And so we've had that contract with them for 6 years. We work alongside of the women and hopefully encourage them to do long-term programs like Samaritan Village. Letitia's house is here. I see Lourdes there, and things like that. We do an outreach ministry. We're celebrating 5 years in April, where we actually go into the strip clubs. We leave the church around 7 o'clock at night, and by midnight, we're down on OBT. We're never going to run away from the darkness. If anything, we put on our full armor of God and let God do the talking for us. So we do that. We offer just little love offerings, like a little bag of something like that. And then our signature we just did last year was a weekend retreat. We called it the Rise Up Retreat, so that these women rise up out of the darkness, out of their brokenness. And so many of these women are doing amazing work in Samaritan Village. They have to answer to house moms. They have to answer to a probation officer. They have to do employment in school and stay clean and all of that. But when do they get to just breathe? And more importantly, when do they just get to relish in God's love? And so we went out to Lake County, a 400-acre sprawling retreat. Woke up every morning down by the lake doing daily meditation and prayer and yoga, and spent the afternoon in some group and individual. We gave them Bibles and journals and said, go walk with God, put on your iPod and just let him cleanse you. And then we did a church service the following morning, and the crescendo, which we weren't even really, we had hoped for, but it wasn't really a necessity, is we got to baptize 6 of the 17 women. And so in that moment, we realized we've got something here. And as I did more research, there's only one retreat that I found for victims of human trafficking or survivors, and it's really not even geared towards human trafficking. It's just a part of their wide retreat. And so I'm proud to say that we are the retreat on the East Coast of this country who offers a full weekend, full scholarship ride to survivors.
So you've heard creative ways of engaging a church from somebody that just prayed about maybe God bringing somebody that didn't know what he was talking about into the world, and then connecting them to well-known, passionate groups like Samaritan Village and others. You've heard from, Meg talked about what this looks like over a long period of time and how the ministry, One-to-One Hope, has evolved. It's each and every one of you has skills, and each one of you, if you attend a church, has assets in the church that can plug in. And it's it's actually a very difficult place to plug in terms of, it's not like you can take a whole bunch of people and go serve without sometimes actually doing harm. So there's a couple things you can do to do this well. And I'm going to have Dee come take my spot here. And I'll open up for 5 minutes of questions, and I'll give you some action items about some things maybe you can learn more about or plug in about through SAFE, and or how do you connect directly with these 3 fine ladies. So I'll open up to a couple quick questions from the audience. So the question is, for people on this side of the room, is has media portrayed it accurately of resources needed to fight human trafficking and engage in the restoration? So let Dee start with that, and you can book in.
Sure. I think because of a lot of the misconceptions of what human trafficking actually looks like, it's hard then to say that there are enough resources. There are not enough resources, and part of that is because I think what media has showed is like, well, once you rescue them, and a lot of these women sometimes are not, in my case, I'm dealing with adult women, it's not a rescue, it's that they land in jail and are identified. They don't even themselves realize that they're victims. So when there is a break in what the reality of the experiences are for survivors or for victims versus what media tells us it looks like, then we're not able to provide the resources, right? Does that make sense? So, yeah, I hope I'll pass it to Meg.
I would just say it's both. Yeah. I've seen the cons, obviously, the misconceptions and the myths, but I've also seen where media has been a champion for those who are trapped. For example, we've got this app called Trafficking, where as a patron, go into a hotel anywhere in the world, and you can snap your hotel and download that to an app that goes to the FBI, and it's the bedspread and the carpet and things like that. And they have rescued women based on this one app alone. But my challenge to you is when you see the media, the better educated you get and the more equipped you are, the better well-versed you are in it, you're going to know immediately they're not telling the true story or they've got it right on point. So I would almost say take ownership of that. We can't control what the media does. We can only control what we know, and then whoever you're watching the media with or in your circle of influence, we always talk about circle of influence, and you can, if somebody says, oh, did you see that report last night on the local news, and you saw Dee or whatever being interviewed, and you can say, that was really great, however, did you know about this? So.
I want to say one quick thing. What I've started noticing, the more I started learning about human trafficking, the more I noticed it. And then because my church was very ill-equipped and didn't understand anything about it. So I said, well, I need to expose them as much as I can to what's really going on. So I started, if I saw something on the news that I thought was relevant, that they should see, then I would point them to that. So you can use it to your advantage as well.
One more quick question. Yeah. Your front row. You always, it's like I tell our pastor says, the people in the first 3 rows, prayers get answered first.
I was just going to ask, isn't there also like, how do you know if somebody is being trafficked? Like, sometimes, like, in my head, knowing, like, what the prostitute looks like, well, they don't always just wear short shorts and high heels, but somebody that is being trafficked, isn't there a signal, like, I don't know what it was, but I thought that there was a signal that somebody could give so that somebody can identify or know that they are being trafficked. And I guess just knowing that if you see somebody like in my head, I picture an older man with some little girl or a younger girl, and to me that just, for one, just maybe is a red flag, maybe not sex trafficked, but just a red flag. So what do you do with that information if you see that? Because, a lot of it's like you don't know how or when or who to say something to, or you just want to go, just mind your own business. They love each other and they're 40 years apart. Okay.
You want to take this, or okay? I could do it too.
So I often say that you can't just typically look at somebody without stereotyping or assuming that they're being trafficked, because it looks like everything and nothing all at one time. There are people that get branded. There are different things that law enforcement can use to identify whether or not somebody's a victim. However, I highly recommend that we do not intervene in those moments. If you suspect that somebody's being trafficked, whether they are or they aren't, your best option is to call law enforcement and use the human trafficking hotline to report it. Because it's not that this is a new phenomenon. In our experience as a community, as a society, we're just still starting to kind of see what it looks like here. And so I always encourage people to use that human trafficking hotline because it pings and we start to see where it's happening more frequently. As far as, there was a second part of your question. You asked, like, what does it look like and what do you do? Yeah, the signals. I've heard different things. I've even heard, like, if you go to certain bars, there's like a drink that person can order that alerts the team to know that that person's in danger. Yes, those are things that we know. It would be almost impossible to keep track of all the different ways that victims or traffickers are using to kind of keep people in bondage. But the biggest thing that I tell people is our guts are our biggest alarms. So if you see something and it feels off, it feels funny, you get to check in your spirit, you get to check in your conscious, call law enforcement, inform somebody, but do not intervene yourself, because you can actually put the life of that victim in. If they really are being trafficked, you can actually risk their life. So, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Well, awesome input from 3 fine ladies. Give me a hand, please. Okay, so you want to know a little bit. Y'all have a seat. A couple of next steps. If you want to learn more about human trafficking,